All right, today we're going to dive into a really powerful story about breaking the silence around mental health. It's a journey that goes from a deep, private struggle to a public mission, and it's one that's fueled by personal tragedy and a real search for answers.
Can you imagine hearing that? That voice in your head? Even when everything on the surface seems perfectly fine? Well, that's the voice of anxiety. It's this overwhelming sense of doom that can just creep in at any moment. This feeling that danger is right around the corner, even when you're standing on a stage, about to share your story with the world.
So you look at the outside, and it's the picture of success, right? A master's degree, a high-profile career in film and TV, even a couple of Emmy Awards. But behind that facade was a completely different story. A reality of feeling totally spent, struggling with insomnia night after night, and feeling completely and utterly isolated. That was the hidden struggle.
And a few years ago, this struggle finally got a name: generalized anxiety and depression. But, the first reaction wasn't relief. It was denial. The thinking was, wait, I'm not weak, I'm a high achiever. And that's such a common misconception, isn't it? This idea that depression is some kind of character flaw, something that just doesn't happen to successful, resilient people.
All that denial, it came from a really deep place of shame. I mean, how could you feel like you have the right to be depressed when you have a privileged life, a loving family, a great career? And on top of that, there's this huge weight of history, thinking about the unspeakable things your ancestors went through, and feeling like you were somehow letting them down. So the decision was made: you just hold your head high, put on a smile, and never ever tell a soul.
But keeping silent, well, it can have absolutely devastating consequences. On July 4th, 2013, that whole silent world just came crashing down. A single phone call brought the news that her beloved nephew Paul, only 22 years old, had taken his own life after his own secret battle with depression. And the heartbreaking part? They were so close, but neither of them ever said a word to the other about what they were going through. That shame, that stigma, it had kept them both silent.
So this incredible tragedy, it kicked off a 2-year mission to really understand depression and anxiety. The question went from a personal why to a much bigger, more universal one. Why is this happening? Why are so many people just like Paul and his aunt suffering in total silence? And the search for answers, wow, it turned up some really mind-blowing facts.
Okay, so get this. The World Health Organization says that depression is the single leading cause of disability in the entire world, the #1 cause. And research shows it's often tied to things we can't even control, like our brain chemistry or our genetics. So let's be super clear here. It is a real biological condition. It is not a personal failing you can just shake off.
And for some communities, that risk is even higher. For Black Americans, external stressors, we're talking about things like systemic racism and socioeconomic disparities, they put them at a 20% greater risk of developing a serious mental disorder compared to the general population.
But here's where it gets really complicated. Here's the disconnect. Even with that higher risk, Black Americans seek out mental health services at about half the rate of white Americans. Think about that. Only about a quarter of Black Americans with a mental health issue actually seek care, compared to 40% of white Americans. And a huge reason for that gap? Stigma. This deep-seated cultural pressure to always appear strong.
Let's actually put a number on that stigma, because it's pretty staggering. A national survey found that 63%, that's almost 2/3, of Black Americans mistakenly believe that depression is a personal weakness. And that one belief right there, that's what feeds the silence. That's what stops people from getting the help they desperately need. And the consequences of this silence are just heartbreakingly real. Over the last 20 years, while the overall suicide rate for young people has stayed pretty stable, the rate among Black children has tragically doubled. That's not just a statistic, that's a crisis, and it's one we just can't afford to ignore anymore. But, and this is so important, there is good news here. There is absolutely hope. The data shows that up to 70% of people who are struggling with depression will see substantial improvement with the right kind of support. Things like therapy, treatment, and medication. Healing is really, truly possible. So to get to that healing, we have to start challenging the very ideas that fuel the stigma in the first place. A friend of the speaker summed it up so powerfully with just 5 words. Being strong is killing us. And that hits hard, right? This idea that we must always be strong, always be resilient, it's a dangerous narrative. This means it's time to retire some of these tired old archetypes. You know the ones. The strong Black woman who has to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. The supermasculine Black man who isn't allowed to show any emotion.
And just that whole general idea that you're supposed to shake it off and soldier on. We've got to let those go.
Because the truth is actually way simpler and way more profound. Having feelings doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're human. That's it. And when we deny that fundamental part of ourselves, it just leaves us feeling empty, searching for ways to self-medicate and fill that void, whether it's with work or substances or anything else.
So, okay, what does managing mental health actually look like in real life? Well, it's an ongoing process. It's not a one-and-done thing. For the speaker in our story, it's a combination of things: daily meditation and yoga, a relatively healthy diet, and, this is a big one, making an appointment to see a therapist when things feel like they're starting to spiral. It's all about building that support system.
So we'll end with this. Life is beautiful, it's messy, and it's always unpredictable. But having a support system can make all the difference in the world. The biggest lesson from this powerful story is that it is absolutely okay to not be okay, and it is vital to speak up, which really leaves all of us with one crucial question to ask ourselves. If your burden gets too heavy, who will you ask for a hand?